Welcome into Other People's Shoes, the podcast where listeners get to step into the lives of others and see the world through their shoes. Your host, Neil Matthews, is a seasoned interviewer who has a natural talent for empathizing with his guests and drawing out their unique perspectives. Through a combination of storytelling and insightful questioning, Other People's Shoes explores the lives of a diverse range of guests, from everyday people to celebrities and thought leaders. With a warm and welcoming style, Neil creates a safe and supportive space for his guests to share their stories, while also challenging listeners to broaden their perspective and think more deeply about the world around them. So tune in to Other People's Shoes with Neil Matthews and get ready to step into other people's shoes.
Hey, come take a walk with me, not like you used to do something different and put yourself in other people's shoes. Open up your mind and open up your eyes and change your direction, change your perspective.
Welcome into Other People's Shoes. As you know, I am your host, Neil Matthews. Thank you so much for joining me today. Super excited that you've hit play today. I think you will be equally as excited that we hit play today. Now, I got to ask this question. I don't know about anybody else. I remember back in the 80s, there was this amazing movie that came out with this young guy. And when I say young guy, he was kind of a little kid. And he somehow was into this video game. And in that video game, there was a secret microchip. That tells you how old it was because it was in the 80s. But the movie was called Cloak and Dagger. And I remember as a kid thinking to myself, man, wouldn't it be cool to be a spy? And then fast forward, introduced to this amazing man named Chuck Norris. And he was just a bad mamma jamma, let me tell you. And that movie, Delta Force, to this day, always invokes in me, gotta take care of the enemy, do whatever it takes. And now, recently, my wife and I have started watching this show. It's on Paramount Plus. That's where we're watching it. SEAL Team. And I'm like, man, those guys, holy cow, I could never be a SEAL. Granted, I know it's a drama, but they go through endure a lot of things. What does that have to do with where we are today? Which, by the way, I hope you brought your coat because we're near Lake Erie and I've heard it's really cold there sometimes. Of course, our guest today probably wouldn't maybe know that because he's wearing a light blue Hawaiian shirt. No, he did not get the memo to wear light blue, if you're wondering. But help me welcome in my new friend, Paul. Paul, how are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Like that, did you? Just weaving all kinds of stuff in there? That's kind of the way we do it. A little monologue. Yeah. Oh, help me with this. Was I wrong as a child to be enamored with the movie Cloak and Dagger as a kid?
Well, no. I mean, I think we all are as kids. You really want to be spacemen. We want to be cowboys even. You know, you want to be doctors you see on the shows. And spies is a big one.
Even in elementary school, writing our own code. We would make our own code and then we would pass notes to each other and somehow someone would have the code sheet. I'm like, but if somebody had intercepted that note, they would have seen the code sheet in the note. We weren't really brilliant when it came to that type of thing. We'll get to all that in a minute, what that has to do with you. I got to ask this question as we lead off the show together. What size shoes do you wear?
I wear 7.5. I'm a small guy.
7.5. That's okay. No shoe judgment here. Well, maybe we'll see here in just a second. Is there a specific brand or a style of brand or maybe a style of shoe you like more than another?
I like running shoes, track shoes, gym shoes, whatever name they go by. I finished off my career working for IBM for 20 some years and that was all wingtips, gray suits with pinstripes sometimes, etc. So I've actually not put a suit on since I retired. Maybe once.
So no wingtip shoes is what I'm hearing. I like that style of brand, by the way. As far as a dress shoe, I actually just bought some recently from, was it Burlington Coat Factory? I don't know why. I'm enamored with that type of pattern on a dress shoe. It looks clean to me.
Yep, they are good. I mean, they're nice shoes. I still got a couple pairs.
Well, sadly, they wouldn't fit me. I'd tell you to send them to me since you're retired now and you're not wearing them, but 7.5. Right. That'd be a tough shoe to get into. I wear an 11, so that'd be a little tough. But as far as like a running shoe, are you just into running, walking? What leads to that type of thing?
Walking, I like to walk. My running days are probably far over. And, but yeah, I like to walk a lot, try to stay exercised anyways. I'm on a rowing machine every day as well too. So that's always fun.
You could just wear slippers.
Yeah, you
Okay.
could.
All right.
Or no
Or
shoes.
no shoes. Maybe just some socks. Yeah. Well, Paul, help me with this. I'm a little enamored with quite the career that you've had. It seems like you've kind of done a lot. And my wife and I have joked for years, for me, well, and even friends who know me personally, they always tease me. They said, well, Neil, what job do you have now? It's a new year. Where are you working now? Because, last year you were here. I'm like, I know last year I was trying to do, such and such. But now I'm trying to do this. And I'm really good at this, I feel like. And then the next year they see me, they're like, hey, are you still at such and such? So I'm like, well, no, actually, that didn't work out. I'm actually over here now. I, too, have had kind of like a gypsy. There's no moss that grows on this rolling rock. Somebody once said to me, which I still don't understand, you've done a lot, you've seen a lot, and you've been a lot.
I guess it was Mae West that said, you only live once, but if you do it right, it's enough. I always just kind of set my sights on doing what I particularly wanted to do, or a lot of times I ended up in the wrong place at the wrong time and had to do some things. So it was a strange choice there you get. So I guess I started off my road to ruin when I was 6 years old, and I distilled moonshine with my dad in Alabama. My job, not a good thing for government people, private entrepreneurs in those days, to be in the same room, let's say. It's kind of dangerous to actually have your product in the trunk with your mason jars and all that sort of thing. So what he did was he had empty mason jars in the back of the trunk, and when he went to sell, he actually put the moonshine in his car for gas. So it was like 110 octane, and yeah, it was a fast car. We had to reseat the valves about every 3 weeks because it burned up the engine. My job was, when we got to the house of the buyer, was to crawl into the car, open up this little shuttlecock, and once they figured out what size jar they wanted, I would fill up the jar and close it off and hand it back to my dad, and he'd seal it up and sell it to him. Maybe it was an impression about my future. I grew up in the 60s. I went to college in Chicago area. It was the days with sex, drugs, and rock and roll kind of thing. And everybody had grass and everybody had marijuana. You pass it around and sell it and all that sort of thing. And I thought, well, maybe I'll do something a little different following Timothy Leary's role. And so I distilled LSD in the chemistry lab at college, sold it to the mob in Cicero, which is a western suburb of Chicago, for $500 a half ounce. So there's that, there's a background. A couple of years after the Summer of Love, which was 1967, I thought, I think to get out to San Francisco and see for myself what's going on. For that summer, 69, I hung out with people you might have heard about. Carlos Santana, Garcia, Janis Joplin was there a lot, Grace Slick. I mean, it goes on and on. And so I hung out with those guys in the summer and ended up at Woodstock the end of the year there. Going to be at Woodstock was an opportunity, since I knew those guys, to go sort of with them, but by myself. There's an old saying about the 60s. If you remember the 60s, you weren't there. What I do remember is I remember being 19 years old. I remember being hungry and buzzed and pumping out adrenaline all at the same time. And what I don't remember is another time like that. Very interesting time to be with people who, came together at a time music was the thing. I graduated. I worked for a year and I thought, holy cow, this working for a living is not a good thing. Not really a good thing at all. So I joined the Peace Corps. Thought, since I majored in staying out of Vietnam in college, I thought this gave me a good protest. I did that, and in training, they sent me down to this place called, I don't know, it's like Paintsville, Kentucky, somewhere up on the Cumberland Gap. It's like a stone's throw from the lost world of West Virginia, place out there. And I thought, holy cow. After a couple of weeks of that, I thought, these guys aren't kidding either. So it's like, what am I going to do? So along came this opportunity, let's say, to work in East Africa in a place called Tanzania, which was a new country at the time, probably a year or two old, really. If you're a gemstone person, that's where the Tanzanite stone comes from. It's a light blue color and all that. Was really popular at one time. There I was digging ditches, raining in the rainy season. I was up to my knees in some kind of animal dung and mud and stuff. And I didn't know if I was crying or or it was raining harder. So along comes this guy, nice cream suit on one of the non-rainy days. And he says, hey, what you doing there? And basically, what does it look like? And so he says, hey, I got a better option for you. He says, how about I give you a ticket to see Europe on our dime? I said, oh, okay, that sounds better than lions and tigers and dinosaurs from the lost world of West Virginia. So I thought, well, I'm not thinking about what's the catch, right? The catch was basically to collect information on potential terrorism in Europe, basically understand and find out if it was going to affect our shores here in the United States. Being 23, it's like, okay, that sounds pretty good. I get to see Europe. And they said, yeah, but you're going to have to track these terrorists. And it's like, yeah, but I get to see Europe, don't I? And being a sort of not a James Bond, Jason Bourne kind of a guy, more like a red shirt guy in a Star Trek adventure, very expendable. I didn't know that, didn't realize it, didn't care at the time. In those days, you knew you weren't going to live till 30 anyways. They gave me a month of training of basically how to stay alive if I got into certain situations with a Marine Corps expert who actually taught the Navy SEALs at one time early on. He was not a nice guy, and I thought of quitting about 200 times during that month or so. Made it through. They sent me to Europe, and for the next 3.5 years or so, I tracked terrorists. And basically what that means is I wasn't specifically supposed to track them. I was supposed to gather information on them, but sometimes I just couldn't let it go, and I had to find it to resolution. What I was supposed to do was collect the information, turn it over to the professionals for resolution, what they called resolution at the time, which would be probably the CIA. I didn't really know, but that was probably who it was. So I was supposed to collect information by maybe following some guys, talking to some people, looking up microfiche in the libraries in the old days. No computers, no cell phones. There we were. Well, there were computers, not the kind that would help us at that point. So that's what I did. And of course, one thing led to another, being young and stupid and untrained, passed beyond my limits. It was all an interesting kind of a deal. I got good at disguises. I learned early on in the old Superman thing, where you put on a pair of glasses and you're a different person. Actually, that's not far from the truth, because what happens is if you change your gait a little bit, especially your gait, like if you put a pebble in your shoe and you start having a limp, you're a different person. Glasses, theatrical mustaches and beards and stuff like that, because I still aren't old enough to grow a beard. Just wondering when that would come. I changed my hair color with shoe polish and sometimes coffee grounds. Those worked. In the old days, you guys probably don't remember, in the old days when people poured a cup of coffee, it always had some grounds in it as well. A couple of times I had to use that in an emergency to darken my hair a little bit, because it was really blonde in those days. You just get used to things like I don't think if I used my real name, I would not be welcomed back into Spain these days. So fortunately, I had a West German passport. I had a British passport. I had American passport, but it was not in my name. Yeah, it was all an interesting time.
Wow, Paul. I don't even know where we start to try to debrief. Man, wow. I don't know if I'm still back on the moonshine or if I'm on the Janice job. I don't know where I am in that rundown of your kind of life journey in a snapshot nutshell. First off, the moonshine thing, I think I do want to lead with that. It was illegal in those days. Bootlegging, I think that's what they called that.
Oh, it's still illegal.
Okay.
if you don't have a government stamp and you sell something like liquor, if it's homemade, you're in trouble. Not if you make wine in your basement and stuff. Feds don't really care about that. But yeah, on a larger scale, it's still illegal.
Picturing you at JoJo's house. Hey, Paul, get under the car. We're here. Let's do this. Yeah. What an opportunity. Was there bonding time with you and Dad in those moments, or no? Were you just an employee?
Yeah, I mean, he actually was an alcoholic since he was in World War II. And so since then, and I was born after that, I had always known him as an alcoholic, really, drinking all the time. As much bonding as you can do with an alcoholic, I suppose.
So what was Woodstock like? And I've heard that phrase. If you remember the 60s, you weren't there. So I have heard that phrasing. Do you remember anything about Woodstock, speaking of?
I remember Richie Havens being first up. Of course, the infamous Jimi Hendrix last on Monday morning. I remember walking and talking to people, sharing not just ideas and thoughts. Oh yeah, I got some weed here. I got some food here. I got some it is. But still being hungry. There were a couple of people there were a couple of groups that were sort of making food for a day or so, but that kind of ran out. People were great. I remember swimming in the pond out behind the stage, and remember swimming and naked, of course, in the pond, and wet, being rain. Probably, I don't know, it seemed like half the time, but it probably wasn't. A lot of rain, not much sunshine, running in trough muds, sliding down, being filthy thing. It was all like adrenaline. Let's do this, let's do that. It's like, hey, that sounds like fun. And meeting people, and actually not meeting some people that later on said, hey, I was at Woodstock too. Great memories and stuff. Yeah, it was all about the music. I guess there was a movie. If you saw any of that's.
I haven't seen it yet, but I have some friends that watched it.
Yeah, that's pretty much what the music side of it was about. A lot of those groups were just kind of like up and coming just at that time. A lot of them weren't known. I mean, Jefferson Airplane already had some hit singles out at the time, and John Sebastian, he was with the Love and Spoonful, but he was by himself there at Woodstock, and Garcia, he was with the Dead. He was probably a couple of steps ahead of Scent. It was a fun time, just relaxing. You hear the music, and actually you couldn't really relax with the music. It was like it got you pumped. That was our allegiance to music in those days. It wasn't anything else. Nobody wanted to be a doctor. Nobody wanted to be a lawyer. They all wanted to be musicians. And here, these were the people that were actually doing it. And it was a great time.
It's something you kind of said, and I think you meant it as a joke, but you said in college you majored in not going to Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
That stuck out to me.
Yeah.
Help me understand that.
There was a little conflict going on in the Far East. You either were deadly in favor of it or deadly against it in those days. In 1969, there was a draft, and they sort of took every month, they would take 10%, they said 10% of every draft board in the country. So if you're in Chicago, for example, or New York or something, you would have a huge draft board. So 10% would be, okay, 10 people out of 100. But if you were in a small town, 10%, and there were two of you, one of you was going. Kind of the atmosphere that until 1969. Then somebody got the idea of a lottery kind of thing, right? So based on your birth date. And that was, I don't know if you know that, but it was like the ping pong ball lottery, right? And every ping pong ball, there are 366 of them every year. They did this once a year after 69 for a couple of years anyway. They sort of put 366 balls in this thing and twirled it up, and the first one to come out was number one, and they would be certainly called for duty. So whatever birth date that was. I had some friends that were number 1 and number 8, and I also had a friend that was 366. And I was in the middle at 254 was my number. I was born 5 minutes at midnight. So if I was born 5 minutes later, I would have been number 16 or something like that, some ungodly number like that. But anyway, so you either went or you didn't go according to these ping pong balls. But the important thing was that if you were in college, they gave you a deferment until you graduated or dropped out. That was called a 2S deferment, I think, at the time. So if you had that, you were safe until you graduated then. Honestly, by 71, when I graduated from college, they were not even getting close to 130 or something on the score, 130 ping pong balls kind of thing. So it was kind of starting to wind down. I think Nixon started winding it down a little bit before he stepped on a squirrel there, I guess you'd say. That was it. I did major in staying out of Vietnam, and what I majored in was English literature and psychology. So I had a kind of a double major because I started out thinking that I was going to be a civil engineer, build bridges and have my name put on them. And after one lowly semester of analytic geometry, calculus, physics, chemistry, and a little 2-hour course on how to be a civil engineer. After that one semester, I really understood the only way I was going to get my name on a bridge was to spray paint it on. So I changed to something easy. Knowing there was no future in any of that, of either psychology or English, unless you're going to teach it. And I was not a very good teacher at the time. I didn't listen to authority very well. That got me onto the Peace Corps. My father worked for the railroad at the time. Since the railroad was all interstate commerce, and so anything that happened on a railroad device or car or train was federal right away because it was interstate. He got to know BI agents really well, and they said, if your kid wants to go to Quantico, we can probably get him in there, take the test, show him how to take the test and all that stuff. Probably spending 4 years on kind of protesting the war with people like Abby Hoffman and Jerry Rubin and Rennie Davis and Hayden and the rest of the Chicago 7. I don't know if you've ever heard of those guys, but yeah, I was right in the middle of that too, by the way. So I thought, doing all that and protesting the war and all that sort of thing, it wouldn't be good for my confidence and my reality to say, okay, I'll spend 20 years carrying a gun with the FBI now. So that's why I joined really the Peace Corps after a year. And I thought, holy cow. After I had this really regular job in computers, by the way, I started out in computers because I just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, or the right place at the right time, whichever way you want to look at it. The guy said, hey, what are you doing after college? And I said, I don't know. What do you got in mind? He says, come on in and let me teach you all about computers. Insurance company called Kemper Insurance at the time. And so they taught me how to do computers. And I thought, wow, this is cool. I don't know if I could do this for 40 years until I retire. That led to the decision of going into the Peace Corps to see what that held for me.
I'm telling you what, Paul, you should just write down all the jobs you've had. We should talk sometime.
I don't think they'd fit on a 2-page resume for sure.
Yeah. Well, I just get bored with things, and then I want to try a new adventure, or that seems interesting. Let's go see about that. It kind of seems like you have that kind of brain, maybe of the curiosity's sake. So help me understand this, because I'm 43. You don't have to necessarily tell me how old you are. We can kind of guess just by the timeline of what you're describing to us. The Paul now somehow went back in time in that proverbial DeLorean and went back and met your college you. What would you share with him about life and maybe where he's heading?
That's a great question. I'm actually, I know lots of people have answers for that, like don't do this or don't do that. I'm not sure. I'd just say, let the kid go, let him find out for himself. I have an adopted son from Guatemala, and he is now entering med school. The reason I mention that is because when he was like 3 years old, put him in gymnastics thinking we could, sort of tiring him out. So he slept at night. That didn't work because he loved it. And he actually did gymnastics all the way through college. I always let him do the things. It's like, okay, here's an option, whatever it is. And I talked to him like he was an adult when he was like 6 years old, 10 years old. I didn't know the difference because I didn't know how to be a parent really. So I talked to him and say, he made his own decision. I let him make his own decisions on almost everything, except, his mom was like, well, no drugs and, no drinking, blah, blah, blah. But he made his own decisions. And it turned out he's a really smart, focused kid. He wanted to be a doctor since he's 11 years old. The reason for that is because he saw so many doctors in gymnastics, lots of sprains and strains, broken bones and things. And he ran into this, one of his pediatric orthopedists was smart enough to sit the kid down and say, this is why it hurts. And this is what's happening. And this is how it works. And so he said, hey, that's really a good way to do this thing. I want to do that too. So, and he's been focused since he was 11 years old to be a doctor. So it's like, go for it, kid, if you want to do that. In my situation, it was a different time. There seemed to be less rules. We could do whatever we wanted to do as long as you were home by when the street lights came on. And sometimes I wasn't, I more than a couple of times I couldn't find any friends to, at night, hang out with or something. And I'd get home by 10 o'clock and my mother would say, she'd sit me down at the kitchen table and say, how long do I have before the police come? That's exactly what she said. Because I was home too early, there must be something wrong. I don't really think that I harmed anybody or didn't steal things. There wasn't that on that kind of a road. It was all like everything was fun for me in life. I like to learn something every day. I still do like to learn something every day. And that was really where my focus was, is to, what can we do now? What can I do now? And this is going to be fun. It's going to be different. I'm going to learn something. Call it a jack of all trades or something. I know a little bit about a lot of things, and a little bit enough to get into trouble a lot of times, especially when I'm building things like carpentry or something of that sort, something normal, right? Yeah. I mean, that was me all the way, Let me go back for a second to this thing in Europe. Well, up until that time, most of terrorism in the world happened when a politician was killed. Idealistic, and our ideology says, kill this particular guy. So, and there was very little fallout around him. You either shot him or you strangled him, or the terrorists were figuring out at that time that wasn't really working, because politicians are a dime a dozen like they are today. You kill one's going to be replaced. What they were starting to do is indiscriminate bombing of places which we would call non-combatants. They were women and children. They killed. They didn't care who they killed. And the point of that was, at the time, was, look, we got to get you guys all agitated up to see our side of the story. What happened was, in civilized society, let's call society in quotes, they said, whoa, that's not a good thing, because that tears at the hearts and the souls of everyone. And that's really where it was all coming to that sort of thing. So that was kind of the environment I fell into, is figuring out why are they doing it? What are they doing? What's the end goal for some of these guys? And although I had specific people that I was looking at and working with, there was still that thought of the bigger picture, like what's going on in people's minds, that's saying that this kind of destruction and carnage was a good thing. I mean, how is that helping anybody? Because it really turned everybody in the world against them. It was what it was, and we had to figure out what was going on with it.
As I'm trying to figure this out, for me, is you're anti-Vietnam in those days. Maybe you're not now. You do everything maybe in your power to avoid going. rightfully said, or am I misreading that?
Correct. Absolutely correct.
Unknowingly, in some respects, take a position within quote unquote the government to go gain information on terrorists, which sounds like, not that we did that in Vietnam. I know every facet that we did in Vietnam, but I would imagine some of that took place just because of, I know how war works. My dad's a former Marines, can kind of draw that conclusion from that. It just seems so counter Paul from 1969 to then take this position. Have you ever thought about that juxtaposition almost?
Absolutely. I was 23. I get to see Europe. That was where my focus was. I get to see Europe. I can go anywhere I want. I walk into any American Express office in Europe and give them the number that they gave me, and they give me money. It's a win-win situation. You didn't really think of the things, the times that you're in danger. And I mean, I have on my palm, I still have a scar from a knife fight in those days, that where the guy was very definitely going to kill me. And I had a very good relationship with an MI6 agent, British Foreign Office lady, maybe even a year younger than me or something, but she was fully trained and knew what she was doing, and probably saved my life probably a dozen times. Otherwise, I would have been forgotten in history and by family and everything else. You're just gone. You disappear, right? Because I would have been disavowed anyways. I was not really working specifically for an agency in the government, although I was off what I considered off books at the time. Yeah, they paid me. They gave me no protection. They gave me no guns. They gave me, although I did collect a few guns in my travels and was able to use them. Yeah, I mean, it was just, okay, well, let's just try this, do this, I mean, I didn't know. I mean, I didn't even know how to shoot a gun before then. And I wasn't very good at it, especially anyway. The lady agent, Zita, renamed her Zita in my books. She was fully trained, and she did not trust me with a gun because I wasn't a very good shot. Who can shoot a gun when they're left-handed? It's just not done, not heard of. So many interesting things. And a lot of those things are actually covered in my books out now. A lot more explanation of how I got into certain situations and things like that, and how and why I couldn't let something go and turn it over. Resolvers, finish offs, it, much to the dismay of my handler, who was back in Fort Meade. I had no help on the ground in Europe except for what I was able to form a relationship with. And I knew drug dealers then, and I knew what you call snitches. I know people in the underground world of Paris and London and Dublin, wherever, in Madrid. So I got to know all those people just by going around and all that. And some of them helped and some of them didn't. It was a strange world. Back then, there seemed to be a whole lot less rules guide you. I mean, today you've got all these oversight committees and rules, and you can't do this without a warrant. Back then in Europe, it was to me, it was a different world. It was something you tried. Oh, that didn't work, so let's try something different. Or, hey, nobody said you couldn't do this, so let's do this. But nowadays, it's a whole different world. And I mean, you even see that in today's society, or how many rules we have. A bad example, you have to wear helmets now when you ride a bicycle. At the same time, in some states, you don't have to wear a helmet if you're riding a motorcycle. So, it's a strange mixture of rules for me these days. I'm not really a rule follower. I'm not a team player, much less. Though I've formed some great teams. Fortunately, I've been lucky enough to collect smarter than I am people around me so that I was able to get things done. You left me alone, I'd be alone. Just a loner kind of a guy.
So, Paul, help me understand this. I feel like you're my resident historian at the moment, if that's okay, just because you've experienced so much of what I heard about growing up, a kid of the 80s. What's one lesson that you think we should have learned in that time period, the 60s, 70s, early 80s, that we're not necessarily following today, that we should have learned back then, that we should have carried forward?
People have lost sense of history, not just to learn the facts, to understand what has happened in the past so that you don't repeat those same things in the future. I see a lot of instances now of people don't even remember John Kennedy. I mean, geez, that was, something like that. It's like, who was he? And I had some kids ask me one time, hey, did you know that Paul McCartney was in a group before Wings? People don't really pay attention to what's happened so that they can learn from it and move forward. I feel in the last 5 years or more, as a society, we've moved backwards 50 years because of not understanding the history of where things come from and facing the truth of the history. I mean, history is always told by the winners. You have to understand that. History is always told by the winners. Therefore, the losers sort of get the short end of the stick. And now we're trying to rewrite history to say it wasn't bad at all. We didn't enslave people. I mean, they had a good time. They had parties every night. That's just one kind of example. You move this far ahead as a society, and then you take a dozen steps back. backwards. And it's like, it doesn't make any sense because the history is there to show you that as far back as the Roman Empire, how they lost their democracy, we're losing a democracy as well just now. And we should be doing something about it. Pick up a history book and understand what was happening. I don't know, 100, 200 years, 500 years ago. It doesn't really matter. Understand what was happening and how the relationships of the people and what was going on around them. Not just the fact that you see something in 1812, this happened, sort of thing, but understand the things that were going on around it. The whole picture, not just the one little thing. The one little thing is either taken out of context or memorialized or whatever your position is on something like that on a particular date. But look at the whole picture of what history has taught us and how far we've come. When we were cavemen, we just used to have, you learn it and then you teach your kids. You learn it from your parents and you teach your kids and all that sort of thing. Now we have it written down and a lot of it's documented. Kind of understand what history has taught us.
So many times in history, I feel like we only document the winner. We don't document the loser. As an example, I think we lost in Vietnam. I think we lost not only a lot of lives, momentum, and I don't remember that. Obviously, I was not even a glimmer in my parents' eye yet. But my dad did serve. He served 2 weeks in Vietnam, and then he was shipped to Laos. Famously, Nixon said, "There are no Marines in Laos." My dad's like, "Yeah, we were there." In my 40s now, I feel like so much history has happened before my lifetime. The amazing Martin Luther King that came through our channels of life. You mentioned John F. Kennedy. I would echo that. Whether you liked him or you didn't like him, he was still a political figure that I felt like was on an upward trajectory to really change some things in history. Seeing a president resign with Nixon, you mentioned him stepping on a squirrel, which I thought was interesting. Woodstock, that amazing music festival. Now, listen, I'm not a big hippie per se, but I mean, there were some big names there. Mm-hmm. To me, it feels like so much happened before I even came along. And I'm almost mad that I didn't get to experience those type of things.
There were some fascinating things at the time, and probably if you're in the right circle, people nowadays would say there are some wonderful things going on as well. Even back in my time, many people missed out on what I was doing. Woodstock, being with the Chicago 7 in Grant Park in 68, and that near history had a lot of things going on around it. It wasn't just about the protest of who the hell they nominated, the Democrats nominated for president at the time. It had a lot more to do with many things that were going on in our culture at the time. You could look at it too as like, that's the time I wish I was there, but a little further back, World War II or even Vietnam for you, that's not a time I want to do. That's not something I want to do. Or there are kids that grow up saying, geez, I wish I was in Iraq or whatever, and do my part. I think every person has their own civic kind of a personality because of the way they grew up and also the genealogy, et cetera, whatever, however that much that plays into it. I think environment is a lot of who we are. It's interesting for me to hear you say things like that. If you think about it, I mean, you've probably seen other things like some baseball hero, hitting 3 home runs in a game or seen something like that and somebody winning a Super Bowl or something. But those are kind of things where I say, well, I'd like to be there too. And I would like to have done that too. I think overall worked and lived in over 55 countries, probably closer to 60 countries, and every state in the United States I've been to on business as well. All mostly thanks to IBM. My goal in when I do stuff like that is partly to understand the culture and the people and how they look at life. Not that I'm philosophic or anything. I just want to learn to see how much people are actually the same. Wherever we go, they're actually the same, have the same hopes and dreams and thoughts and prayers, and they're dragged into bigger things in life sometimes, like wars or conflicts or something, as an example.
I think that's what's so fascinating about your story. And I echo that last little segment that you were saying. And that's why we've always asked where people are from. We have a little map in our studio. We put a little pin where people are from, partly just because I wanted to see in the early days what states we've been to. And so we have a goal of trying to get to 50 states. We're close. We still need West Virginia. I feel like that's going to be the last one. I don't know why West Virginia. Maybe because it's like the John Denver song, Country Road, take me home, West Virginia. Because I feel like when we're going home, we're done. We're done with the day. And so, right. I don't know. So if you know anybody in West Virginia, maybe help a brother out.
I think I probably do.
Okay, cool. Been asking folks all season long, is this you're only? When you hear that, what invokes in you? You're only what?
I'm just a guy. I mean, I'm not any sort of hero or anything like that. If you imagine that, it's not that kind of I didn't lead that kind of a life for glory and for country and God or whatever, but it was just did things. Only a man, only just a guy. I didn't have any aspirations to be known or get rich or anything of that sort. So it was, for me, it's just basically my whole life was just do this and try it, sort of thing. And in that way, I was just a guy. It wasn't anything special.
Well, I think others would maybe disagree. You're also an author, so that is something that you could say.
Yeah, I am. I didn't start writing until after I retired from IBM. As I said, my son was in gymnastics, and so he had 4 hours of training every night of the week, and on Saturday too, I think. After a couple of days of that, watching them pummeling around on the mats and stuff, the parents, we sort of gravitated over to the local pub at the time, and over beers you start exchanging stories and all that, and so I happened to mention a couple, and my doctor friend lady said, "You should write a book about that." And I said, "Yeah, I don't know." And she says, "You're retired, what else you have to do?" And they said, "Oh, okay, that's a good." So what happened was I started writing it down, and it really got to be fun. And then when people read it, they loved it. They liked it. That's how I really got started of writing. And that was probably 10 or 11, 12, maybe 12 years ago. The first book, #1 bestseller, I read it almost right away on Amazon. And on a whim, I sort of entered into a contest kind of thing. And it was called the World's Best Story of 2014. And there was like 2,000 English speaking books in the contest. And I happened to come out a winner. So I thought, well, okay, maybe we got something here. So maybe I write in the next installment of my story in Europe. And the second one is actually about what they call the Troubles, UK. I don't know if you know that. It was when the IRA bombings, and the English were polite enough to call it the Troubles instead of like those rat bastard Irish, or something like, right? So they called it the Troubles. And during the early 70s, that lasted probably maybe up to 10 years. I don't know. But I was right in the middle of that for a while. And then the third book had to break into Czechoslovakia, which was an Iron Curtain country at the time, to help my friend Zita, who was accused of murder behind the Iron Curtain, and she neither wanted nor needed my help, as it goes. Those are the stories so far. And then there's a fourth book coming out, and maybe a fifth one as well. All of them are #1 bestsellers and multi-award winners, which I think you'd enjoy. A fan of terror and espionage, you might like them. Not if you're a hardcore guy like a James Bond, Jason Bourne. Again, these are about lucky to be alive kind of a character. I was going to tell you, there was a prime minister in Spain back in 73, into 73. At the time, Franco was still alive, and he knew he was dying, and he appointed this guy as a prime minister who was one of his buddies. And I don't know if you know the history of the Spanish Revolution. There was Franco won the war, and he was only really allowed to be the leader of the country because King at the time did not abdicate the throne when he left Spain. And he's just like, well, I'm always going to come back. And so Franco was on his side, actually. So he was supposed to rule until the king could come back. It just happened that he lasted 30 or 40 years before the king was coming back. Specific goal was to tell the new prime minister, you got to bring the king back. But that guy wasn't really interested in bringing him back either. A lot of Spanish people were against him. It turned out that one of the guys I was following, I followed him from Paris, Madrid. He actually blew up the guy in a car. And I happened to be right around the corner from that explosion because I was trying to warn this prime minister guy that something was going on that street. Just before I got to it, and that explosion, the only reason I'm alive is because of the concrete building that I was just behind, maybe 10 feet behind. The concussion blew me over a row of cars into the street, and I couldn't actually find the ground. I didn't know where the hell I was for 10 minutes maybe. But anyways, when I got back around to the other street, there was a huge big hole in the street. It was filled with water because of the water pipes and the sewers in the street. But it was probably 40, 50 feet across. And what happened was the guy he rented a basement apartment across on that street and dug out the entire underneath the street and filled it with dynamite. And when this guy came around, the prime minister, he was driving of all things, a Dodge Dart. Now you think, well, that's a strange thing for a minister to be driving. In those days, the streets were narrower in some places, so they had to have smaller cars, so it was more maneuverable around the old city streets. And the other thing was that he had put an extra 3,000 pounds of armor all around this car, underneath, on the sides, so that he wasn't going to be assassinated. What happened with this bomb, it blew with concussion below him, so it kind of blew the whole car in one piece up over a 5-story church into a courtyard in the next street. That's actually the first book starts, and it kind of gets stranger from there.
So if I'm understanding correctly, you've taken your stories of what you encountered over in Europe and you've turned them into a book. You've just maybe changed some of the names and maybe places.
The places are all the same. I did change the names, though, just because I thought, well, that's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, I've heard that too.
Fiction-y kind of a thing, you know. And Luis Carrero Blanco, that's a documented thing, and so I left his name the same. He was plastered to the ceiling along with his driver. I stood in the courtyard and saw that car. Interesting times. And lots of bombs in those days and stuff.
It almost sounds like a book very similar to what I've been reading called Orphan X, and it's a guy by Greg Horwitz. He writes a series called Orphan X. Mm-hmm. The main character's name is Evan Smoke, brought up from a foster home, abandoned kid, and they trained him to be an assassin. And now he's doing freelance work for people to kind of right his wrongs from what he worked for the government. And he has this unlimited amount of resources and all kinds of stuff. Pretty fascinating. I'd be curious about your book too. Well, Paul, so how can folks get it? We should probably talk about that. Where can folks go to get the book?
Most easily found on Amazon. Either Google my name, put in my name, or else the first book in the series is called The Hollow Man, because of how I was kind of empty inside, basically. That comes from the T.S. Eliot poem anyways, about disguises and people not being real. The Hollow Man is the first one. London Bridge is Falling Down is the second one. And the third one is Surviving Prague. And if you just basically put my last name in there, you'll probably find them easily. I also have a website, thehollowmanseries.com. I have some interesting blogs on there that will tell you some more of the details that I've already talked about, kind of things. So about growing up and what I'm like. And also about half of those blogs are, if any of your readers are authors or trying to be authors, lots of blogs on how to be an author, how to develop characters, how to develop your own voice as a writer, how to plan it, how to start, almost everything you can think of are on there now. So, and I just keep putting them on there because I'm trying to give back to writers because we're all in the same boat. I'm not competing with anybody, just trying to help other folks out. So go to the website and especially look at the blogs. You'll learn something, as I have in the last couple of decades.
We also have another place that we're going to highlight one of your books. It's called opspodcast.com. Well, that's awesome. So we do this thing at the end of the show. It's called Senseless. It's just this silly way we like to end the show. It's just some levity. Sometimes we've had obviously a real intense guest, and so sometimes laughter kind of can be the best medicine. At least that's what Robin Williams used to tell me. I never met him, but he always would make me laugh, and I would always feel better afterwards. So anyway, we're going to roll a die. There's a cup. There's a die.
Okay.
So we're going to roll. So it's 6 random questions. You don't have to answer all 6. We just make it random just to make it more fun.
Okay.
And I know it's a North Carolina logo. It is a number 1. So being that you're such a traveler, I'm curious about this because here's the question that you got. Gives the randomness to it. That's why we roll the die. Question number 1 is this. One place you need to visit. That you need to visit.
That I haven't been or that I have been, or it doesn't matter?
Sure. Yeah, it doesn't matter. However you interpret that question. One place you need to visit.
I'd like to see the southern coast of France again.
Are you not permitted to go there?
I am, yeah. No, they don't know.
Okay, all right, just checking. I don't know.
They don't know who I am for real.
But nowadays, with all this facial recognition and AI stuff, do you think that there's a chance that you would maybe get picked up if you went to Europe?
Do you think a 73-year-old guy looks the same as a 23-year-old guy? I am way, way different.
I don't know.
No, facial recognition. One of my jobs at IBM was my last job, international manager for video surveillance. I can tell you that there are some flaws still in facial recognition. So just be aware of that. A lot of false things.
Well, that's good. I would agree with you because every time I go to look at my Apple phone, it doesn't always open, and it's supposed to. So I'm going to go with you on that one. I know that for a fact. Every day I'm like, open the phone.
Right.
Anyway, well, Paul, I'm serious. Like, there's so many things that we could keep going on. I mean, there's just so much. But I want to thank you for your time today. I want to thank you for what you gave us and the stories that you shared, man. I just want to acknowledge that and say thank you for that.
Here.
Well, guys and gals, kids and campers alike, that's it. That's all. That's our show today. I don't know about anybody else. Seriously, we could keep going. I mean it. What about for you? Paul mentioned this hollow man kind of at the end. Did you catch that little gem? That hollow man, that man pretending maybe to be somebody that he's not, or he's just so hollow on the the inside. Now, I know it's a fictional character. I get that. What about for you? Have you still been maybe kind of struggling with the fact that somebody's told you you're only ever going to be fill in that blank? You're only ever going to do, again, fill in that blank? Is that you this week? Is that still something rolling around in the brain of yours? In the recesses of your soul? Listen, Paul's done a lot. He's seen a lot. He's probably been a lot of places, as he mentioned. But what about for you? What still kind of drives you to be limited in that belief? Something to ponder today. If you're still willing to try it, I'd love to challenge you on this. Find a way to come out of that. And I have some ideas if you're interested. Let me know. opspodcast.com is a great place to let me know. You can also let us know on the social medias at OPS Podcast Show under Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And of course, last but certainly not least, do not forget, remember this. Remember, when you walk in other people's shoes, you really do get a different perspective on life. Thank you so much for joining me. Stay tuned till next week as we walk in other people's shoes.